Oil is a type of commodity, like even other commodities such as raw materials, cocoa, and all that. Their prices over the years have been observed or found to be very, very volatile. The prices fluctuate from time to time depending on two major factors: the supply of the commodity, like oil, how much supply is in the world market at any point in time in relation to what consumers are willing to buy from the market. In other words, demand. Demand and supply forces all the time determine the price. And so, when there is a tendency for countries producing oil to oversupply, produce so much more than necessary in the bid to make more money, then, and the demand has not correspondingly increased, price in line with market forces will go down. And we then found that over time, prices tend to go up, or down. Sometimes when there are perceived scarcities occasioned by maybe conflict or war in a zone producing oil, like the Middle East, that can make the price of oil to go up sharply. In this very case now of sharp drop in crude oil prices, it primarily derived from sharp reductions in global economic activity. That is global production of goods and services, occasioned by the coronavirus disease, coronavirus pandemic. In order to contain the coronavirus disease, nations have had to lock down their economies. That is to say, restrict movements. And if you restrict movement, it means you are not able to go to work, you are not able to go to factories to produce, and therefore the demand for oil, which is an input in the production of goods and services, necessarily falls. And that's what has happened. In China, is the largest importer of crude oil in the world. And so, now that that country was the first to lock down its economy, the production of goods and services reduced. In other words, output contracted. They now have need for little, quantity of oil. Now the disease spread to other countries, and they also have had to lock down their economies. And of course, international air travel has been curtailed very drastically. The aviation industry also depends very largely on oil. So what has happened essentially is that the industries and activities that rely heavily on oil are not buying as much again. The only, all over the world now, the major industries, particularly countries affected by the coronavirus, the only industries that are in active production are industries relating to food supply, relating to medical supplies in terms of equipment, drugs, and perhaps a few other essential services. All the other parts of the economy have been locked down. They are not producing, or not producing as much as before. So the demand for crude oil in the world market has fallen drastically. And then on the supply side, you found that at the beginning there was rivalry between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a leader in terms of supply of oil to the world market. America also supplies a large quantity, of shale oil. Then Russia and Saudi Arabia, Russia had joined OPEC countries, including Saudi Arabia, to try to regulate the price of oil. But at some point, they more or less disagreed, and both threatened, to increase supply of oil to the world market, at a time they should be cutting, supply. And I think they actually fought for some time, and that one further increased supply of oil to the world market, amid very limited demand. So price necessarily had to fall of oil. And so it's not surprising that the price of oil, crude oil per barrel, fell from, the mid-60s, dollar, about $65 to $67 per barrel in January this year, to what we now have in the mid-20s for the best crude oil. That is a Brent. Our own oil type, the Bonny Light, is a little lower, and much lower in price is the West Texas oil. So you find that this is the major reason. But now that OPEC, 1.5 weeks ago, OPEC plus Russia and a few other non-OPEC countries have agreed to cut production by about 10 million barrels per day. But that one has still not helped, to shore up the price of crude oil. That will show you the magnitude of the supply-demand imbalance in the global oil market. That unless economic activity actually rebounds, in other words, the lockdowns in various economies, become relaxed following the containment of the coronavirus pandemic, that we may not witness, the kind of high prices that we had seen before. So invariably, that is the context for the current low oil prices. It's not surprising to those of us who are economists, because we know that there are what we call business cycles normally. In periods of business cycles or periods of wars, conflicts between countries, crude oil prices can go up very high. We've experienced booms like that in Nigeria a couple of times. Now if there are serious crises, then the prices go down. What sensible countries like Saudi Arabia and other oil producers, exporters in the Middle East do is that during boom, when prices of oil are very high, the countries take percentage of the revenue earned and put it in a savings account called sovereign wealth fund or just savings. In Nigeria, Obasanjo established such savings account. Obasanjo did a very good job, very sound economic management principle. He set up what we call the excess crude account. And, prices were rising at the time during his regime. And, rather than squander the money, he set up the excess crude account. And by the time he was leaving office in 2007, there was about $20 billion in that excess crude account. The purpose is that when prices are high, you build up the reserve savings. When prices go down, the government will not want to reduce consumption or expenditure, because that would be very painful kind of adjustment. Imagine a government that used to spend 5 trillion naira budget. Because oil price has gone down sharply, it now reduces the budget to 3 trillion. It then means that the possibility of even not meeting recurrent expenditure in total, will be there. Salaries may not be paid and so on. And so what then happens when oil price goes down and there is savings? The government will take money from the savings account and use it to maintain about the same level of expenditure. And nobody will know that, or feel the impact of low oil prices. Or government will not panic when oil prices are getting low. That's, it was from the savings that President Olusegun Obasanjo's government made during his rule. It's from there that government took money at that time to pay off the debt, part of the debt that Nigeria owed, Western countries. Nigeria was supposed to pay about $12 billion US. In return, the Paris Club of creditors, European official creditors, cancelled 18 billion of Nigeria's debt. And that brought Nigeria's debt to that club, which was about 30 billion, to zero. Because Obasanjo used 12 billion out of it to pay, and then the other was cancelled. And in the 2008, 2009, when there was the global financial crisis, the oil prices went down. But we did not feel the impact in Nigeria because the government of Yaradua Jonathan at that time found huge savings which they inherited from President Obasanjo's government. They took part of it and maintained the level of expenditure. In other words, they were able to smoothen consumption, and so we in Nigeria did not feel it. But what then happened thereafter? The remaining savings in the excess crude account was squandered by the succeeding government, Jonathan's government, at the federal level and at the state level. Such that savings that Obasanjo left about 20 billion in 2007, by 2014, the savings was left about $2 billion. And during the period 2009 to 2014 was a period of very high oil prices in Nigeria. By July or so 2014, oil price per barrel in Nigeria was $147 per barrel, the highest ever. But ironically, that was the same period, of high oil prices that government chose to squander all the savings. In other words, as oil prices were rising, rather than saving money, the government was depleting the savings. And so by the time President Buhari took over in May 2015, what was left in the excess crude account was just about $2 billion. And that year witnessed more or less collapse in oil prices. As at the time President Buhari assumed, took office, the price of oil has so declined that the revenue accruing to the Federation was 50% of what was obtained 6 months, 9 months earlier. So the nation was already in economic crisis by the time President Buhari's government took power. And they couldn't do much because there was no savings to fall back to. Saudi Arabia does not panic, like Nigeria panics when crude oil price has fallen like this. Saudi Arabia in 2016 did not fall into recession because it had no money to spend, because Saudi Arabia, as of today, has over $500 billion in its savings account or sovereign wealth fund. The problem with high and low oil price is that a sensible country will save money when prices are high, and then when prices are low, use from the savings to maintain the same level of consumption or even increase consumption so that it will be able to implement its projects and programs, and the citizens will be very happy. So in terms of how do we avoid the kind of situation we are in now, because we are in the situation in which the country found itself in 2016, and the economy went into recession because crude oil price collapsed and the country did not have savings. We must learn a culture, imbibe the culture of savings. This whole idea that state governors want to spend money, they want to bring dividends of democracy to the people, and whatever is earned is shared, does not make sense economically. All they need to do, whatever little resources are available to them, they should be able to increase the quality of spending so that if they spend 1 naira, it will add more value, to output, to services produced by society. And then secondly, when oil prices start rising again, government must now learn to use oil resources to diversify the economy. In other words, develop other key sectors of the economy: agriculture, industry, particularly manufacturing, tourism, and, of course, construction industry, and so on. When an economy is diversified, the government will be able to generate plenty of non-oil tax. And so whether oil price is going up or down, the country will not feel it because it would have, a resource base, a non-oil resource base, to fall back to. So diversification of the economy and savings. The government must take the issue of excess crude account very seriously. I know in the past, the governors had argued that there was that the excess crude account is not contained in the Constitution. In other words, there is no legal backing for it. The National Assembly has a responsibility there from now on. They should, enact a law either to, legalize the excess crude account and produce formalities, for, putting money into the account and also withdraw money from the account. Or government at the federal level can merge with the assistance of the National Assembly, can merge the excess crude account with the nation's sovereign wealth fund. We have a sovereign wealth fund now, which is backed by law, but the money there is less than 2 billion. Recently, President Buhari, in his stimulus package, said they will take some small money from there, but only little they can take from there. One would normally say, well, government can borrow money, to keep up the pace of consumption or expenditure, including recurrent and all that. But the size of public debt in Nigeria as of today is already very high, and stakeholders have raised numerous concerns, as to the size of debt, and have accordingly, advised government not to borrow more, because borrowing money means that you have to pay back. You cannot be using the small revenue accruing to pay back. You pay back the principal and then the interest. So borrowing, there is very limited, room there, for government to borrow. Perhaps, to keep capital expenditure going, government can go to the capital market, issue bonds, float bonds, and then, get some money, but make sure that the money is utilized for concrete projects, that can even generate some income or aid productivity of other enterprises that can generate income so the government can service it. I know the last time, too, when more than 20 state governments were owing salary arrears, 3 months, some to 20 months. The federal government, of President Muhammadu Buhari, approached the central bank to, help, by way of sourcing for funds, and I think over 600 billion naira was, sourced by the central bank and given to the state governments as loans. But, unfortunately, after collecting the loans, and then a good number of them were able to use it to calm the situation of no salary payment in their states, and they were supposed to be repaying the money. A good number of the state governments, began to show reluctance, in repaying the money, periodically. And some were actually asking the federal government to direct the central bank to write off, the loans and so on. Business is not done like that. Central bank cannot just go to the mint and start printing money and sharing it to everybody. It's not done. If it does that one, our economy will be on fire, inflation-wise. We could get to a situation whereby you're now looking for 1 million naira to buy a loaf of bread. That situation happened in Zimbabwe until a few years ago, and so on. So, to the extent that productivity is very low in Nigeria, there is a very limited extent to which, central bank can go to the mint and print money. I'm saying this now because I know one of the important leaders of the APC, in his suggestions 2 or so weeks ago in the newspaper, was saying central bank should go and print money, so that government can get money to spend. That is not a viable option. If central bank gives money out, then whoever it gives, either the federal government or the state governments, must be ready to repay, particularly when the lockdown is lifted and the economy begins to rebound, and then we are earning money from oil again. Now it's even difficult to get more money from enterprises that are not producing. They are not making money and are laying off workers and even asking for assistance. You cannot be asking them to come and pay tax during this period, for instance. So it's the government is in a difficult situation, and I think that's why, in response to this coronavirus pandemic, some of us had made the suggestion to government to say, set up relief fund at the federal level and at the state level. Plead with citizens to contribute. so that, you have reasonable amount of money, that you can use to fight the disease, stop the spread. And you also have some money to provide, I think they call it palliatives now, but I would prefer something, more concrete than the palliative, because people are very suspicious of those palliatives. If we find a mechanism and we transfer cash to people who are displaced, who are not earning income at this time, even if it's 10,000 naira or 20,000 naira, that one will be much more appreciated than saying that we are sharing food and people are complaining about the quantity of food anyway. I saw on television a situation whereby some youths were playing football with a loaf of bread allegedly given to a street in Lagos by those who are sharing palliatives. Those are not the kind of palliatives that will make people happy. What other countries are doing is to arrange to transfer cash to these people. They want to use it to buy food, they buy. If they want to buy medicine or some other things, they will buy it, and so on. So, but meanwhile, for whatever the revenue collection agencies, they should not relent, in their efforts. As much as possible, where it is feasible to collect revenue, they should still go ahead and do their work. But international trade at the moment is more or less halted. Imports are not coming in, so we are not even getting revenue from custom duties and so on. So whatever we have, government must now learn a lesson from this. The little money available must not be allowed to be looted or diverted in any form. Nigerians put in positions to disburse funds on behalf of government for whatever reason must learn to be patriotic and ensure that the funds are used for what they are meant for. And by so doing, the problems will be limited compared to if, on the one hand, they are diverting the funds and little is available. But then they are incensing the public that can easily revolt against the government, which is not desirable. We are not praying for that at all.